they're going to have to figure out how united they really wanted to be. And it helps that the person who's basically leading this changeover is George Washington. He was the first president, and George Washington's somewhat of an anomaly in American political history, I think, because he sort of predates political parties. And everybody likes Washington, who's here. He's unanimously elected to be the first president of the United States twice for both terms. So that George Washington starts off as the president here, and he picks people who he wants to work with him in his cabinet, right? And since there's no political parties, he just picks people that he knows, people that he likes, that he thinks are competent. So, for instance, his Secretary of State, and they had meetings right up the street where he used to live, at like 6th and Market over there. So they had these cabinet meetings, right, with the Secretary of State, who's Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Now, even though they both work for the same president, they end up having pretty significant differences in how to interpret this new Constitution, what kind of law should be passed here in this room. So slowly but surely you see the development of political parties during this time period, with Hamilton and the Federalists, they were called, on one side, and Thomas Jefferson and what historians call the Democratic Republicans on the other side. Now the thing is none of them want to admit that they're forming political parties, because George Washington really doesn't like this. George Washington warns this nation against the dangerous effects of political party, thinks that they will not be good for this young nation. So they sort of work together as best they can. They pass a lot of pretty influential laws during the Adams administration. Probably most notably is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution are ratified here, the Bill of Rights. Maybe one of the most well-known parts of the Constitution, even though it was added a few years after the convention. So the Bill of Rights is ratified here. The government's chugging along, but there's starting to be some divisions forming here in Congress. And it all comes to a head after George Washington decides he doesn't want to be president for a third term. 8 years is good enough for Washington, 2 terms. It's time for him to step down. And this is where things get a little bit more interesting, because it's easy to have an election when everybody votes for the same person, right? But with George Washington deciding, I don't want to be president anymore, you have 2 different political groups fighting for leadership. Now, Alexander Hamilton is a bit of a controversial figure, so he doesn't run for president. John Adams does, and he wins. He defeats his old friend Thomas Jefferson, and I'm telling you all this not just to dive into presidential history here, but it's relevant.